African Americans had not risen much in the 20s. As the country got richer, African Americans did not really. But unfortunately, they will take the brunt of the Great Depression. In fact, I often describe the Great Depression as when the economy got so bad that white people couldn't feed themselves. Because honestly, this was fairly common for blacks. Langston Hughes would say, when the Great Depression came along, black folks barely noticed. We didn't have that far to fall. Over half of African Americans are still in the South, and when cotton prices collapse, the sharecroppers and tenant farmers find themselves in their own crisis. Blacks leave the land, whether they want to or not, and move to the cities in large numbers, which is one reason why cities now contain most African Americans in this country. That and the Great Migration during World War I. But unfortunately, they can't find the traditional African American jobs like janitors, street cleaners, and domestic servants because the economy has gotten so bad that whites have taken those jobs. And so our African American employment will be above 50%. 400,000 more African Americans moved to northern cities, and we call this the Second Great Migration. But unfortunately, they find things are just as bad there as they've been in the South. 2 million African Americans are on relief by 1932. I'm going to highlight here real quickly a court case, the Scottsboro case from March of 1931. Now what happens here is 9 black kids get into a fight with white kids who are jumping a train. It was very common back in the day to hobo trains to get around. 2 prostitutes who had also hoboed the train to go into the city were riding on the train as well. And when police arrested them, they wanted to avoid Mann Act charges. They had crossed state lines for the purpose of prostitution. And so in order to throw suspicion off themselves and not be arrested for crossing state lines for prostitution, they claimed that the black kids had raped them. The evidence makes it completely clear that the black guys were totally innocent. But of course, this was in Alabama, and Alabama doesn't really care if they're innocent. They get railroaded. The trial is a joke, as you can imagine. And in the North, this becomes a big deal. People in the North are horrified at the lack of justice for these black folks, these black kids. The Communist Party actually comes to their defense. Everyone is eventually released except that one of the black kids had been shot and killed while they were locked up by a prison guard. Today we know that the black kids didn't really have anything to do with the girls. They were just lying to try to get themselves out of trouble. But this is the sort of racism you faced, of course, for committing the crime of being black in America back in the day. Hispanic immigration begins to become a factor. They're treated like African Americans more or less, and they hold the same jobs as African Americans. They tend to be small-scale and migrant farmers. But of course, whites also take their jobs in the Great Depression. At times, they're denied relief, basically because they're considered not to be American, even if they were born here, for example. Many, even American citizens, are arbitrarily deported. We had a policy of just throwing Mexicans out of the country in the Great Depression. Of course, there are people today who want to do that too. 500,000 Hispanics leave America during the Great Depression. It's the only time in our history that more people leave America than come to it. California Mexican agricultural workers try to form a union, but the state government declares it to be illegal, and the landowners who hire those migrant workers use their political power to crush the union movement. So unable to find farm work because white people are not doing it, we see Hispanics moving into the cities and creating the barrios. And if you've ever been in a city like El Paso or Los Angeles or San Diego, you know there are these large Hispanic neighborhoods. And that's really where they begin to be a significant presence in the city, is during the Great Depression, before Hispanics tended to be in the countryside. This is a similar story for Asians. But in a generation of educated Asians have always placed a high priority on education, will be denied professional jobs and be forced to work menial labor if they can get a job at all. Women are seen as competition for jobs. From 1932 to 1937, it is illegal for 2 people in one family to have a government job because they want to spread the jobs out among the families, which means it's basically illegal for married women to work for the government. Women have to work to support their families, though. 25% more women than the 1920s had entered the workforce during the Great Depression, even though they are barred from most jobs. But many women's jobs are less affected by the Great Depression than some other jobs. In the South, however, that's a different story. Women tend to be domestics, and they are let go because they become a luxury that people can't afford. And we see massive unemployment for women. Black women are hit particularly hard. But even despite all that, by the end of the Great Depression, 38% of black women are employed and 24% of white women are employed. The middle class prosperity of the 1920s devolves into sewing your own clothes and canning and preserving your own food. Men, in many cases, become emasculated because they can't find work and maybe their woman can. And so the traditional role of the man as the breadwinner gets turned on its head, as maybe a woman is able to find work but the man can't. Divorce declines, not because people are getting along better, they're probably struggling more with money problems, but it's just too expensive to get divorced. And so families will break up at a higher rate, but you won't go get a lawyer and file for divorce because you can't afford to do that. And for the first time in 100 years, both marriage rates and birth rates will drop during the Great Depression as people respond to the economic reality.